of Christ by thee. Through eternal ages let his praises ring. Over you the highest I will shout and sing. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises that cannot fail. When the army throws the die of fear assail, I believe the word of God shall prevail. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of Christ the Lord. Not to him eternally, but of some more. Overcoming daily with the Spirit's sword. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fall. Listening every moment to the Spirit's call. Resting in the Spirit, my all in all. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Dear God, thank you for everything you have. Those things that we know of and things that we don't. Many of those so many blessings on us that we don't even know are there. And we thank you for those things. We trust you, we love you, we follow you everywhere. We hope that we're doing a fantastic job for you, Lord. That you'll be proud of us as Christians and proud of us as people. Love you, Lord. We know that everything that is from you, and that everything that is good is account of you. Thank you for this, and we thank you for the sacrifice you made for your Son. Say these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. All right, this evening we're going to be in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, starting about verse 25. And the parable that we're going to be talking about is what? Parable of the Good Samaritan. And we'll have opportunity to discuss this and make some applications both in understanding what was happening at the time of Jesus and how it can also be applied to us as well today. All right. Now, the first of all is the premise of the parable. And just for setting, we're in the last year of the ministry of Jesus. I don't want to say things are winding down, but in truth, things are building up. And so Jesus, as he got closer to the end of his ministry, he began to state more boldly about who he was, and he began to be a little more pointed, let's say. I won't say antagonistic, but he was a little more pointed in how he dealt with the Sadducees and the Pharisees and scribes, because they were the ones who were always challenging him for his doctrine, for what he was teaching.
Charles, I came up with the word contentious.
That's good.
Contended with them more boldly.
Yeah. Again, if you recall, in the beginning, Jesus was sort of laid back, didn't push them too much, but the closer he got toward the end of his ministry and what he knew was going to be his crucifixion, his betrayal, he began to goad them a little more. He did become more contentious. And this may have been an opportunity for that. He's not quite as hard as he could have been, but he's been involved in teaching. And then after he has taught, he apparently walks to go somewhere else. I don't know the total environment. We're just guessing at what that would be. Did Jesus just walk around the square? Are we talking about walking from one small village to another? But as he's walking, as he's going, it says, who came up to him? A lawyer. A lawyer. Now, what does that mean?
He's not a lawyer like we have today. He's a lawyer of the Mosaic law.
Yes, he is a lawyer of the law of God, the Mosaical law, and he reads it, he studies it. He's a scholar, we would say, and if you have any questions, you could probably ask him. He'd be able to handle that. Yes?
Did we say he was a Pharisee, or is that too?
We can't say that, but the odds are yes. Most of the people were Pharisees, but those who had political power, somehow they got an inside track with Rome, and most of the people who had the political power were Sadducees. But most of the people and the Pharisees were followed the Pharisees and their doctrine. And can you think of a couple of things about the Sadducees and the Pharisees that made them different?
The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection.
Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did.
That's Sadducees. Marjorie.
All right, what else? Can you think of anything else?
Generally, the Sadducees did not accept angels, spirits, anything like that.
Right. They kind of thumbs down on anything we might say spiritual or supernatural, something like that. So there were differences, but again, as I said, most of the people were Pharisees. They followed the teaching of the Pharisees. Now, they both had position in their society, in their community, but in the political power, somehow the Sadducees got the upper hand on that. But, all right, so this questioner then is a lawyer, which tells us he knows what? He knows the law of Moses. Yeah, he's supposed to. He's dedicated his life for that. And so the question here is, give your response to the answer he gave to Jesus. He came up and asked Jesus what question? All right, how am I going to inherit eternal life? Now, do you think he was genuinely looking for an answer?
No,
Yeah, probably not.
not according to Luke.
Because he just,
Luke said, he questioned him on occasion. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. So obviously he wasn't asking out of a desire for knowledge.
he didn't need to know. He was kind of wondering now why would he do that?
What's the traffic?
Well, but why would he think he could?
Well, if you're in that position, it's like an authoritative position, and you represent something. He was the representation of the law.
Okay. And has Jesus upset them before with some of his teaching that didn't fit their mindset? Yeah. So this looks like, hey, maybe I can catch him in something here. And so the real purpose is to find out if he can snag Jesus, if he can hook him, if in some way he can get Jesus to say something that's going to be, yes, and drive a wedge between Jesus and the people. Go ahead.
Or possibly he just wanted to prove how smart he was.
Yeah, he may very well have been driven by his ego, because that happens, doesn't it?
Well, what his response to what he he was expecting to be able to let Jesus say something and then, oh yeah, well, here's the real answer.
Yeah.
from the law.
Going to straighten him out, get him on the correct path. So he asked this question, and Jesus does what? He doesn't answer the question, does he? He answered the question with a question, which is something I've been told I'm guilty of. But, yeah, and why is he asking this man, why is he throwing it back at him? Is he trying to be nasty, ugly? What's the deal?
Maybe coy to a certain extent.
Okay. What's coy mean? Sly. Okay.
He was protecting himself.
All right.
This man is purporting to be an expert in the law. Jesus says, well, what does the law say? You tell me what the law says.
And the guy says, just a minute, let me get my scroll and look it up.
No.
What's he say? He quotes it. He knows it. He obviously wasn't asking the question to get an answer that he needed. It was all a test, an entrapment. He was hoping it would be.
It's considered a good teaching technique to help the student when first asking to think for themselves
Mm-hmm.
or open-ended questions instead of, and even though this had an answer, it made them think about it.
And it sticks with us better when we are participating. I mean, have you ever? That's one of the problems with preaching. It's, anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and a half of what? One-sided lecture. And when I was a boy, my mother and one of the elders were the only two people I've ever known who could just kind of get like this and never nod. My mother said she wasn't asleep, she was just resting her eyes. Yeah. But, what do we do in lectures? We go to sleep, either physically or mentally. We're out here digging in the flower bed or grooming our dog or planning where we're going to have lunch, because it's hard to focus and pay attention to a lecture. But when you're participating, you stay with it, you learn more, and you remember it. So what Jesus did is a good teaching technique. All right?
Well, if Jesus was on the witness stand, and this lawyer asked Jesus what, and then Jesus asked him a question, the lawyer would say, I'll ask the question. But he wasn't.
He wasn't on the witness stand. And it wasn't our court of law either. All right. Let's go to number 5. Consider the reasons he would have felt it necessary to justify himself. Why would the lawyer think he would have to justify himself?
One of the commentaries I read said the lawyer was trying to eliminate responsibility for others by making some people non-members.
Okay.
Commentary.
That's all right. We'll go with that. That's kind of ahead of where I think we are right now, but help me on the justification. Why would he think he had to justify himself? Yep. Validation. You don't want to look like a fool.
I mean, they weren't the only people there.
Right. There's no telling how many dozens of people were standing around there eavesdropping, because have you ever been in a situation, maybe you've gone to a lecture and afterwards they'll say, I'll take some questions, and then they'll, after a few, say, okay, well, time's over. If you got any more questions, come up. And here's the speaker down here, and there's a 10, 20 people come up, stand around him. And somebody may never ask a question, but what are they doing? They're listening to the other questions and answers that are coming. So there were people there. And from my slanted perfection. The lawyer is really trying to make a fool out of Jesus in some way. He's trying to put a bad light on him. And it didn't turn out that way. Yeah, and so now the lawyer's got to try to say, well, let me try again to nail you to the wall, or whatever it is that was going on in his mind. He's trying to justify himself, to make himself look good before Jesus and probably before the other people that are there.
Well, he is, after all, the expert.
Yes, he's the one that's supposed to know it all. He's the lawyer.
But if he can't embarrass Jesus, at least he wants some credibility from Jesus.
Mhm. Good.
I think concentrating on calling him a lawyer puts him in a little different light. I would characterize this guy as an arrogant professor. Really.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Because you're in a class and you got a professor that knows everything, and that's what he's gonna prove, that
Yeah.
I am the ultimate expert on the subject. And if somebody asks him a question that he doesn't like, what's he gonna do? He's going to try to make himself look good and the other person look like a fool. That's
And
what this guy's doing.
I can't say I have known a whole lot of PhDs personally, but I've known enough to know that it's amazing to me how many of them are just like that. And he's the expert, and he's trying to make himself look good.
You know, if you have the ability, you can talk and answer a question without really answering the question.
Politicians do that all the time.
Yeah, you running for office? Yeah. Good. Anyone else?
Charles, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but an expert is almost like an insult. Because if you split the word X, it's a has-been.
Yeah.
A spurt is a drip of water under pressure, so you want.
Yeah. A drip of water under pressure. Yeah.
They were always giving Jesus a hard time. They were always looking for him.
And the reason is because he didn't fit their category of what the Messiah was supposed to be, and he didn't fit into their slots of Sadducee or Pharisee. I mean, he picked on both of them. And so he didn't fit in. Didn't fit in. And yet, he could embarrass both sides with his questions and put them in a spot. All right. So, Jesus then moves into the parable. Now, what can you tell me about going up to Jerusalem? Or coming down from Jerusalem? To tell you anything? Jerusalem's up high. You know, they're not super mountains, but they're city of Jerusalem is, I think, about 3,500 feet high. And when it didn't matter where you were in Israel, when you went to Jerusalem, you always said, what? I'm going up to Jerusalem. Right, even though it was south, you know, or whatever you were, but I'm always, and when you and I talk, I say I'm going up to Kansas or I'm going down to Houston. And we're looking at the compass. Well, they looked at the elevation. And Jesus says there was a man who was going what? Yeah. He's in Jerusalem and he's going where? Which is not a great distance away. I don't remember now, 7, 8 miles. And in that mileage, it drops about 4,000 feet.
3,200 feet in 18 miles was the reference I saw. That's pretty steep grade.
Yeah, that is. I don't know if you've ever gone east and you get around Ranger, is it? And you drop off the Cap Rock. Choom, you know, it kind of goes down. You lose like, 400 feet and 400 feet and 400 feet. It's a steep drop. Not as steep now as it used to be. They used to have to get out and push the trucks. But Yeah, he's going down to, and what can you tell me about the road? It was narrow, it was windy, and there were a lot of hiding places. So guess who hid in those hiding places? Bad guys. And so it was a dangerous strip of road. And one of the things that I read, they were saying as late as the 1820s, which is a couple hundred years from now, but this guy was writing 100 years ago. He said in the 1820s, it was still a dangerous place because that's what people would do. They would hide and rob the innocent who were coming. Now, there's some things about this parable that might not fit into reality. For instance, all the characters involved are traveling alone. That may have not been reality. It'd be kind of foolish for a person to travel alone on a road like that. So Jesus is probably not talking about a real event, but he's giving a parable, saying this is what's, here's what's happening. So, dum-da-dum. What would you say about the parable? Tell me a little something about it. You don't have to tell me the whole thing. Just get us started.
Well, a man was coming from Jerusalem going towards Jericho and was attacked by robbers, and they left him for dead.
He's beat up pretty bad, isn't he?
A couple other people just walked past him, got on the other side of the road, and
All right.
pretended like he didn't exist.
Or that he did exist, he was not clean, or,
And the thing is Jesus just starts telling this parable, and he doesn't identify anybody. So what's your immediate assumption? Jesus is talking to a lawyer of the Mosaical law, and he tells them this story, this parable. Now, what's the assumption about the characters involved in the parable? The guy that's beat up and laying on the side of the road, what is he? Well, no, he had enough money. They beat him up, robbed him, but he is most likely a Jew. That would be your assumption in your mind. Here's Jesus, a Jew, talking to the lawyer of the Mosaical law, and he says a man went down from Jerusalem and he was beat up and robbed. Well, the assumption is that's a Jewish man. I would also assume even the robbers were Jewish, because not all the Jewish people were wonderful people. So, he's beat up, basically left either for dead or to lay there and bleed to death or die, from his injuries. But then what happens? Here comes a man walking down the road, and what kind of man is he? The first one that came by was a priest. Now, the first person that came by was a priest. And he looks over there and apparently sees something. Maybe he can see enough to, we don't know whether he just saw a foot, a hand, a head, or the whole body. We can't tell. That's not the point. But he saw enough to identify the situation. And so the priest whips out his first aid kit, puts out flares so the trucks won't run over him, and goes and helps the man, right? Second guy is a what? And what are the Levites? They're the priest helpers. They're not priests. They're, though the priests are from the Levitical tribe, this guy is he's the Levite, but he's not a priest, but he's one who helps the priest. He's like his right-hand man and doing his work in the temple and other things that he's doing. So, now, they don't say that he's a Pharisee or a Sadducee or a lawyer. So, priest and Levite, where are they in the religious hierarchy? Yeah. These are the people that you would think would be the best ones. You probably heard the story about a guy, a minister who moved to a church. And it was back when they had buses, and the preacher got on the bus, and he gave the man a bill, and the driver gave him some change back, and he went back and sat down in his pew and in his chair, and instead of just putting the change in his pocket, he looked and realized the man had given him too much change. And so when he got off the bus, came to his stop, he walked up to the driver and handed him some money back and said, "You gave me too much change." And the bus driver said, "Yeah, I know. I heard you preach Sunday, and I just wanted to see if you were real." So he was testing the man. In a way, kind of what happened to him. Jesus was being tested. But this is a priest and a Levite, the two people that are supposed to be the best, and both of them walked on by and didn't do a thing to help.
Do you think though, because, not that this would be the excuse, and most of the time, the closer they were to the law, or, they really felt entitled, because they were the chosen people, and they were God's people, and, I think that they suffered a lot from entitlement. But,
You talking about the priest and the Levite?
no, or I mean, I'm talking about yes, the priest and the Levite.
Yeah.
They were, because, you feel like there were so many rules
Yeah.
in cleanliness.
We're just guessing. We don't know. But if the man laying over there was still, they could have thought he was dead. And what does a holy man, a priest, not do? Doesn't touch a dead body. Yeah. So we don't know. We don't know. Personally, I think the guy had to be moaning and groaning and flipping it, in some way. But I don't know that for a fact. But for whatever reason, whether it was in their mind legitimate justice, maybe they were going to the temple and they didn't want to be late. Have you ever saw somebody in need, but you were 5 minutes away from church and you had to get there before they started, and you didn't want to miss communion? If I stop and help this guy, so I'm just not going to stop. I mean, that sounds legitimate, doesn't it? If I stop and help this old lady change her flat tire, or help her pick up all the groceries that busted out of her bag and laying all over the street, if I stop and help her, I'm going to be late for church. I won't get to take communion. I won't get to see my brothers and sisters in Christ. So just let her take care of herself. That kind of mentality could have been going on. Who knows? We're not only guessing, but we're sort of putting our own mind in the situation about what would keep us from doing what we knew to be the right thing.
Jesus was good about humbling them and giving them the new law.
Yeah.
And how things work. So,
When I was a boy, and about 10 or younger, this didn't have anything to do with religion. I don't know why I did this. But I decided where we lived who my neighbors were. And the neighbor was the one that lived in the house next door, and the house behind, and the house on this side. Now, to me, those are my neighbors. Everybody else just lived, just lived there. That was just, I was 8, 9, 10, I don't know. But the question here that the lawyer comes back is what? Who is my neighbor? Now, they had, again, their made-up laws, and I read from one source that if a stone wall, somehow because of bad mortar or whatever, if it fell on a man and covered him up on the Sabbath day, that you could uncover him enough to see if he was a Samaritan or a Jew. And if he was a Samaritan, you couldn't get him out because you'd be breaking the Sabbath. But if he was a Jew, you could get him out. I don't know whether that's true or not. That's what somebody said it was. But the point being, who do you help? And this guy is saying, who's my neighbor? Well, they did not consider Samaritans neighbors. Yeah.
One commentary I read said Jews interpreted neighbor very narrowly and technically as excluding Samaritans and Gentiles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It had to be a Jew to be a neighbor. They had to be Jewish. Let's talk about the Samaritans for just a minute. Where did they come from? What happened to them? Explain that.
They're a mixture of Jew and whatever.
Yeah. When the Assyria came and captured them, Syria's foreign policy was, we're going to take these people out of this place and put them somewhere else and bring somebody else over here and replenish the population that way. That was the way Syria did. And in that process, many of the Israelites intermarried with the people who had been brought in. And even those who had been carried off to another land, they intermarried there. So they became hybrids, I guess you could say. Hybrids. They were not fully descendants of Abraham. They had some foreign blood mixed in there. Now, there was foreign blood among the Israelite people, but they were people who had done what? Esther, Ruth, what'd they do? Rahab the harlot. They converted, we would say. Yeah, but the Jews intermarried people without necessarily converting them. Second thing that happened is when the north and south kingdoms were divided, the Jeroboam, who was the king of the north, realized if his people went down to Jerusalem for the temple, that what's going to happen to their allegiance? It's still going to be tied to Jerusalem. So to prevent that, he built 3 places of worship on 3 high mountains, and he said, you don't have to go all the way to Jerusalem. Just worship here. It's easier, more convenient, closer. You don't have to go this far, yada, yada, and that kind of stuff. And so that was the Samaritan people. They had corrupted the law. They had corrupted their bloodline. And the Jews hated them for that. They were worse than dogs, worse than Gentiles.
It was a mutual detest. The Samaritans hated the Jews, the Jews hated the
Yeah, well, when you hate somebody, it kind of comes back at you. You're right. Yeah, they didn't either one care for one another very well. Okay, where are we?
Charles, did they know why they hated each other?
Yeah,
I was just thinking about the Hatfields and McCoys.
yeah. Well, they knew originally, but that forgot, but yeah. When Jesus met the woman at the well, she was surprised he talked to him, because a Jewish person, and certainly a Jewish man, and certainly a Jewish rabbi, did not talk to any woman in public. And he was talking to a Samaritan woman at the well. So that kind of blew her mind right there. And of course he then taught her. That's another we'll get to that later on. All right. So the third person that comes by is not a Levite, not a priest. He is why did Jesus pick? He could have said Roman soldier. But he said Samaritan.
To tell them that, hey, everybody's your neighbor, no matter what. Everyone's your neighbor.
But they hated the Romans, but they had some respect for them. But the Samaritans, they had neither. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say the Samaritans were looked on as dogs, as something that was, they were outcast, really. They were above the Gentiles, but they were still outcast from the Hebrew society. And for them to do something good was kind of blew the Hebrews' mind.
Especially to do something good to a Jewish person. They might do something good, but not to a Jewish person, at least in everybody's thinking and in their thought process and their mind. What do you expect for someone like that? And because of the long-standing hatred there, probably some of it was true, but a whole lot of it was just their attitude, what they thought about people. What do you and when you're prejudiced, can anything good come out of where?
Anything, if it come out of you, period. Anything that comes out of you, not good.
You said what? Nazareth, yeah. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Why would they say that? All right, let me pick on somebody. What town can we pick on around here? Some little town.
What's the first city in Mexico?
In New Mexico?
Yeah, right on the border.
Yeah, we could say Las Cruces or Canutillo or Horizon or Socorro. We could pick any little town, and if you want to build up your prejudice toward it, you might say, can anything good come out of El Paso? And obviously it can, but your prejudice is coming through. And the point here is, can a Samaritan do anything good? And the natural answer would be no. But in this case, he did. All right, someone read the next question.
How did the Jews travel northward from Jerusalem?
They usually took the long way.
Yeah. I don't have a whiteboard or chalkboard in front of me, so use your imagination. Here is the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, the Dead Sea. Down here is the city of Jerusalem and the tribal area that we would call Judah. Now, up above here is the place of territory referred to as what? Galilee. And when the Jews wanted to go up here, you know what they did? They didn't. They crossed the Jordan River and went up on the east side of the Jordan River, and then they came back across. They would not go through where? Samaria. Now, we're going to pick on New Mexico because anybody here from New Mexico don't want to offend you. But if you were going to go to Colorado, but you didn't want to go through New Mexico, then you would head over here east, and when you got over around Midland, Odessa, then you would go up to the Panhandle, and then you would cut back across, maybe the Oklahoma Panhandle, but you'd go all the way around New Mexico, because that's how much you hated and despised New Mexico. Now, what did Jesus do? He went through it. That's how he met the woman at the well. Jesus didn't have that issue. He didn't have that problem. So what was the question? How did the Jews travel? They took the long way. They went around about. And again, why? Because they despised the Samaritans. It's the kind of thing that if you went into the marketplace and someone said, this is Joe Samaritan, they wouldn't shake hands with them. They wouldn't greet them, might not even speak to them. Just the issue there was so strong. So, the priests and Levi we already talked about. They were the upper holy ones. Now, again, next question. Their concept of being a neighbor, they'd already narrowed that down. And that, first of all, it had to be a Jew. And they probably had some other things that went in there as well. But you're supposed to treat your neighbor in a kind way, in a loving way. But that just means only the Jewish people. It would be like our saying, we're going to be kind to our neighbors, but that's only the members of this congregation. Nobody else is my neighbor. Kind of, from our perspective today, kind of dumb, because Jesus taught us here in this parable. That's not the way God looks at it, not the way Jesus looks at it. What do you think about a neighbor? What should they have known about being a neighbor? Who is a neighbor? What is a neighbor? Well, yeah, I'm sorry, you're getting ahead of me a little bit. Normally speaking, in just everyday parlance, Yeah, people you live close to, people you know, you have some kind of interaction with them, you're friends. You go out in the store somewhere, you're shopping or eating, and you see, oh, there's my neighbor. Hi, Joe.
One of the things this lawyer, whatever you want to call him, should have known, one of the elements of the Ten Commandments is do not covet your neighbor's wife, do not, do not, do not. They already knew about neighbors. He should have immediately known the term neighbor.
Well, he did, but they had defined it.
Yeah,
They had defined it their way.
yeah.
And had we been back there, and he would have probably said, well, get Webster's dictionary and look it up. He's Jewish, they would have those limitations on it. And so Jesus is introducing a new concept here for them. Now, we've lived with it. We've grown up with it. We've studied the scripture. We've heard this parable, and we know what's happened here. Jesus is reversing it. In the parable, what makes a neighbor? I think you're close, but I would reverse it.
Someone that you have some care about.
Yeah, the neighbor is not them, it's me. So who's my neighbor? The one I'm neighborly toward. And who am I neighborly toward? The one that's in need. So instead of defining it this way, it's defined this way. It's outgoing. Jesus is our neighbor, or we are his neighbors. He died for us. It's what he did for us, not what we did for him. Jesus says, go ahead.
You know, I have a question for you. I didn't want to interrupt where you're going with this, but were you going to go back and discuss the meat of just the parable itself, where, okay, the Samaritan takes him, first of all, he binds up the man's wounds, and pours boiling wine on him, puts him on his donkey, takes him somewhere that somebody can care for him better, but tells then the man that's going to care for him, here's 2 days of worth of wages or whatever. And when I return, I will reimburse you for anything else you spent. When he returns, indicated he's going to stop and check back about
Yeah.
the man. How is he doing? Was there anything else involved? What can I help him more with?
And we have to make some assumptions here. And again, this is not necessarily a real story, but I think there's some things implied. For one thing, what about the innkeeper? Innkeeper, this is not first aid. This is not ER. It's not a hospital. This is a bed and breakfast.
But he's going to extend himself to the point that he's willing to take on a responsibility, a duty that
Yeah.
he might not have expertise.
And the amount of money that he's giving him, it doesn't exactly translate into our dollars and cents, but I read it was, according to what would have been the cost of staying overnight in an inn, we're talking about 2 months. He's given this guy enough money for him to stay there for 2 months.
And we don't know, maybe he did. The Samaritan was just said when I returned.
When I return, and maybe he was planning on coming back in 2 months. I don't know. But when I return, if I owe you any more, I'll pay for it. Which sounds like the guy makes a trip back and forth. Maybe the innkeeper knew him. See, these are all things we're just guessing at. We don't know. But the point being, he didn't give him $20. He gave him a lot of money to take care of this guy for 2 months. Let him sleep and rest, medicate him, feed him. 2 months.
And he might have taken advantage of that, knowing that he was, prepaid for and stayed, even longer. But the point was that he put himself out there to do that. The
Yeah.
question was,
Right. Or the innkeeper could have said, hey, yeah, well, he took a lot of, he ate a lot, whatever. He could have raised the price up when he came back. But again, that's not the point. That's not the issue. The issue is what the Samaritan did.
But that's like with us, you can't, some people will say, I don't like to give people on the side of the road, money because, they might use it for this or they might use it for drugs. It's not about that. Your responsibility is at the.
Well, since you raised that up, let me inject my 2 cents here. What do we know about this guy bleeding on the side of the road? We don't know anything about him except what? He had a need. This wasn't somebody who just didn't want to work. I mean, he had a need. He's about to die if he's not helped. So this is a legitimate need. And sometimes people use this story to milk others for money, support, and I think we need to make that distinction there, that this man bleeding, he had a legitimate need. And again, I don't want to get off the point of what the parable is about. The parable is about the Samaritan saw someone who needed something, and he provided it. He helped him. And who was he? If the guy hadn't been laying half unconscious in a ditch on the side of the road, he might not have even spoken to his rescuer. Had they passed on the highway, he might have looked the other way and not even spoken to him. We don't know. But at this point, the Samaritan is saving his life. And then, though, did I get ahead of myself? Well, we kind of talked about number 13 earlier, and that is that the priest and Levite could have had legitimate reasons not to stop. They might not have known, but those again would basically have been excuses. And we've touched on 14 also. Does anybody want to read those verses, or have you all ready and got something you want to share?
Matthew 5, 23, 28, the gist of that is to love thy neighbor. That's
Yeah.
what I wrote down on.
Right. And again, that communicates a lot to us, different than what it would have communicated to the Jewish people. Because for them, that would have been, love your Jewish neighbor. It had that identifying caveat to it. Because for them, the neighbor had to be someone who was Jewish. To love thy neighbor is great. And then when you can narrow it down, I mean, if you take neighbor to mean people who are from Texas, then you say, okay, yeah, I'll love people from Texas. But not those people in New Mexico or Oklahoma or Tennessee or Georgia. I ain't going to love them Yankees up north. I'm just going to love those my neighbors who are in Texas. Well, that's the mentality and the psyche we're talking about that was present at this time in this culture and this community, and Jesus is putting it in their face. And again, the definition of neighbor is not on the other person, it's on me. Because he asked the lawyer, who was the neighbor? Who was the neighbor? We know the answer. It wasn't the one who was in the ditch. It was the one who helped a person in need. So again, we reverse the definition of neighbor. It's not on the other person, it's on me. Who am I a neighbor to? Anybody else? Questions, comments, remarks?
It sounds to me like it always comes from the heart.
Got to come from the heart?
Where
Yeah.
the heart is, whether you're going to help or whether
Yeah.
you're going to walk behind.
We have to make that decision to do God's will and go in that direction. All right, good. Anyone else? Yes.
So remember what this whole parable was about. The guy who he quoted, and part of the quotation was, love your neighbor as yourself. And the guy comes to who is my neighbor? And Jesus, in essence, gives a hyperbole.
Mm-hmm.
Because what he's doing is he's throwing this all out of proportion. He's not passing, believe it or not, he's not passing judgment on the priest and the Levite. He's saying what they did. What he's concentrating on is he's taking an absurdity. A person who hates Jews, not because of anything else but that the Jews hate him.
Yeah.
And casting him as the hero of this, and now throwing it back in this lawyer's face and saying, who was the neighbor?
Yeah.
The Samaritan, the person who had no business being nice to a Jew.
Yeah.
And he said, act like the Samaritan.
You know, even in times of war, whatever the war is and whatever sides are involved, invariably you will come across a situation where an enemy soldier will be nice to the other enemy soldier, you know, whatever, and everybody's kind of shocked, you know. Well, that's what's happening here. Maybe not in reality, but metaphorically speaking, they would have killed one another. That's how much they disliked one another. But yet here he is reaching out and saving this man. This bitter enemy is saving him. Good. Anyone else? Thank you.
And that went on for generations and generations ago. You know, the kids were raised to not dislike the Samaritans and vice versa.
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah. Eventually, what are referred to as the 10 tribes or the 10 northern tribes kind of just faded into oblivion. Now, if you're familiar with the writings of my mind's gone blank. Who's the guy that wrote the Book of Mormon?
Oh, Joseph.
Joseph, yeah, Smith. He believed that the 10 lost tribes came to America, and that's where the Native Indians came from, or something like that. But they just kind of intermarried, continued to do so, and you know, they're not a distinctive unit anymore. Yes.
We have to think as Christians, we have to think that person has a soul. And we have to try to influence them to believe in the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an absolute truth, and we need to do that. From my perspective, though, some people a few years ago took it another step and gave birth to what's referred to as the social gospel. And that basically meant for them that the role of the church was to help the community. So that those people who did that basically quit teaching the gospel and just started becoming charitable organizations, doing good things, helping people and all the different things that you can think of. And I have no objection to the good things that they're doing, but they replaced the sharing of the gospel with just being nice and doing good to people. And yeah, they've got to have the gospel. That's what this is all about. We have to be the ones doing that. All right, good. Anyone else?
Are you going to touch on question 15? Because I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, it gives us 3 verses there to read, and the question is compassion always about physical need. Of course, you know is the answer to that. But look at Matthew 5:7, which is contained in the Beatitudes. And my question: blessed are the merciful, because they will be shown mercy. Do you think that mercy is from earthly people, or does that refer to God? Or maybe a combination?
Oh, Well, I think the return is from God. That's what I think the Beatitudes are saying. But that doesn't mean it can't come from other earthly people too. But the ultimate, from my understanding, the ultimate would be, blessed are those who do this, and you'll get it back in this way. So I think the Beatitudes are talking about what return we're going to get from God when we live this way. But that doesn't mean we don't get it from other people, because you can be merciful to someone, and a third party over here can see what you're doing and think highly of you and then show mercy to you in some way. Yeah, or the person that you were merciful to at a later date may have the opportunity to be merciful to you. But they don't have to bleed. Somebody doesn't have to be bleeding, laying on the side of the road, in order for us to be merciful to them, to be kind to them, to be a neighbor to them. Anybody else want to comment on that, or those other two verses?
Who are we to put ourselves higher than God? If God shows us mercy, why can't we?
Yeah, that's the nature of God, to be merciful, and we're supposed to be like God. Why can't we? We should do that. Good, absolutely. All right. Can you think of some way that you've seen someone else be merciful, maybe to you or maybe to someone else you've seen them be merciful to? Just as an illustration.
Well, a lot of times, being merciful to people, sometimes it's just by encouraging them. Maybe they don't have a need to be clothed or fed or taken care of medically or some way like that, but befriending someone, encouraging them.
We have a great difficulty sometimes connecting with other people. I know you are probably aware of some cases. We're not asking for any names, but in your mind, you probably know someone they could almost be a hermit. And they almost are hermits. They live in town, but they're never around anybody.
And there's a reason for that
They
a
don't.
lot of times.
Yeah, and it can be extremes either way. We don't know what the reason might be. One person may have a different reason than the next person. But one of the things all people want is to belong, is to connect. But some people don't know how, or they can't, or they're afraid.
Sometimes a smile is the best thing you can do for
Yeah,
somebody.
yeah.
They say that there's people that have not committed suicide just because somebody smiled at them.
Yeah. And if someone says, "Well, I don't have anybody to talk to. I'm alone." Well, hey, guess what?
Who are you talking to?
Yeah. Who can you call? You find somebody you think is alone, somebody you think needs some connection with the rest of the world, and you be their connection. And in being their connection, you're also connecting yourself and helping them as well.
Charles, I gotta give kudos to the guys in my new band. We have a new member of this band, and a real nice guy. He's not the best or very good at what he brings to the band, but the guys have accepted him
Yeah.
and included. You can tell he wants to be a part of something. Makes him feel good. Cool.
And I tell you what I have seen is that someone who was engaged in personal Bible study with an outsider, and they taught them how to become a Christian, and they were baptized. And then when that person was there in church, nobody had anything much to do with him, and someone asked about him, says, "Oh, that's Henry's guy." You're not going to have anything to do with him because Henry studied with him and baptized him? He's not Henry's guy. He's the Lord's guy. He's my guy. And if I'm a neighbor, what am I going to do? I'm going to go connect to him, aren't I? Just like this Samaritan did. So that's what being a neighbor is about. Again, the emphasis is on us, not the other person. See, the Jews described a neighbor by who they were. Jesus describes a neighbor as who you are. He asked the lawyer, "Who was the neighbor?" And the answer was the one who did good to him.